round 7. This was Joe Burrow, Amari Cooper, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Hopkins, Devonta Smith, Christian Kirk, Russell Wilson, Tony Pollard, Chase Edmonds, Kadarius Toney, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Hunter Renfrow. And really, this round is kind of the tale of two halves. You can see here with the advance rates, which are kind of handy to look at. There's a sea of green at the top and then a sea of red at the back half of it. There was some really good players and then there were some really bad players. And that carried over into fantasy points over expected, where, again, we had some real stinkers. And yes, we're talking about you, Russell Wilson. But this conversation feels like we should be starting with Josh Jacobs, who, if you were drafting a lot of Josh Jacobs in round 7, there was a really good chance that you advanced an awful lot of best ball teams in 2022. He was just incredible. He was the RB3 overall, almost 100 yards per game. Kyle, did you see this coming for Josh Jacobs, or were you like the masses and fading him and really just felt like it couldn't happen for him?
Yeah, I had like next to none of Jacobs before like the final ADP plunge, at which point, like, I think I should have been even, I mean, it's easy to say in hindsight. I think I should have been even more price sensitive in that, like, obviously if his price were to go up, I would continue to not draft him, but I should have been even more willing to draft him as his price went down because his backfield competition was so weak. The Raiders projected to have a good, if not really good. It didn't end up being that way, but they were like, I think they're like dead even, like 15th in scoring. So a good, slightly above average offense could have been even better. Backfield competition was weak. So I thought once the price corrected so hard in the final, like, 2 weeks of the summer, I started getting some Josh Jacobs, but his price plummeted like almost from the day we started drafting. It just never really went up. It just kept going down and down. And by like, gotta imagine July should have been at least a reasonable time to start taking him. Instead, it was like the 11th hour on the clock. And I'm like, oh, I guess it's time to get a little bit of him, a little bit of David Montgomery, these types of backs. But also he's been pretty talented throughout his career. I don't think he's quite, I mean, it's pretty hard from like a real life perspective to put up first round running back value. Like that's just the way the position is. He hasn't quite lived up to that, but he's had a pretty strong career so far. He's been a pretty efficient running back at times. So, and he's shown the ability to catch passes, even if they generally didn't use him that way. We saw that a little bit last year during the first half in the Gruden era. They actually were like pretty comfortable using him as a pass catcher for the first time in his career. So we knew he had the potential to put it all together. And I think maybe like, I don't think he was like, it wasn't easy to see in hindsight. I think there were indicators, but like, did he lead the league in rushing? I kind of think he did.
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah. And it was, and just going back to what you were saying, like looking at this round in particular, you know, in hindsight, the choice between him and Chase Edmonds, it felt like Chase Edmonds was the young up-and-comer. He'd just been paid, and, you know, we were all chasing money. It was like, you don't pay a running back that much money and not use him.
And Jacobs had been not paid. They chose not to pick up his fifth-year option, too, so he had, like, the opposite effect going for him.
Exactly, and, like, the Jacobs truthers will tell you that this was just always coming and that the talent had always been there since college, but I don't think that there are any positive signs that we could have pointed to, whereas perhaps next guy, Tony Pollard, if you're a zero RB fan or even a hero RB fan or just a fan of good running backs, then you've probably been on a Tony Pollard at some point. And it felt like this year we finally got all the payoff for talking him up for years. You know, he was the RB7 overall, 4.0 fantasy points over expected per game, 17 big runs, which is the third most at running backs. And it just felt like nobody wanted to draft Zeke Elliott last year, but Tony Pollard, he didn't quite get priced for his breakout. If this was the breakout that we were expecting, there's not really too much to glean about that situation now. But if Tony Pollard ends up back in Dallas next year, do you think that the ADPs are going to flip? So we'll see round 4 Tony Pollard and round 7 Zeke, or do you think it'll be more extreme?
I think it might be more extreme. People love Tony Pollard. Like he was going, think about how many touches, like he exceeded his touch expectation by a wide margin. Like last year, as in 2021, I think Zeke missed, I think he missed no games, right? And Tony Pollard had 63 fewer carries, like the same amount of receptions on fewer targets. Not much change this year. Zeke was not good in 2021. Was not good in 2022. Zeke missed 1 or 2 games last year and none, I think, 2 years ago. Like there wasn't much in terms of how much we could project him to get touches differently that changed. The only thing that changed was Dallas sort of capitulated, but really like they didn't really, right? The capitulating to the Tony Pollard truthers would be to find out if he can handle 22 carries and 6 targets a game. That would actually be the smart thing to do. Or if that's not the case, if you think there's no way as a team, like if the Dallas coaches think he just physically cannot hold up to it, just throw the ball more, use Zeke less, get Tony Pollard in space targeted more, because targets are less likely to turn into like between the tackles, like brutal head on head collisions. Like there were so many ways they could have actually taken more advantage of Pollard. And the fact that they didn't shows us that they did not even want to give Pollard like this level of role. Like this was the max he had. And he ran like he's really good. So I think we can project him to be better than average running back in average situation type of player. But on 193 carries, he topped 1,000 yards and scored 9 times. He was elite on a yards per target, which isn't, and yards per out run. Like he was really good in all efficiency metrics, scored 3 times and averaged like 10 yards per catch. Like you could have gotten Josh Jacobs, who was getting like, he had a stretch where he was averaging like 33 touches a game in the same round as Tony Pollard. And I love Tony Pollard, but like, we are really going to give him a lot of credit for efficiency next year. I am sure of it. And I think he's good and should be efficient over the long run. Do I think like we're probably going to overstep our bounds because we think he's like the best running back in the league, which he like by some metrics he kind of is, but he'll never get the touches to replicate that volume that someone like McCaffrey has. I think he ran good to outproduce his ADP as much as he did this past season, and we're really going to price him up because of that. I think it's going to be like a round 3, round 9 to 10 plus split.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of kept his ADP as low as it was in round 7 was the fact that people believed that Zeke would get so much goal line work that he would be hoovering up so many touchdowns. But we saw with Pollard, he had 12 touchdowns, which was fourth most at running back. And he really did pay off. Another player who was kind of kept down by his teammate and the value that might have been there was Devonta Smith, who when A.J. Brown came into town, obviously everybody just believed that everything was going to go to A.J. Brown, possibly some to Dallas Goedert, and it would have been very hard for Devonta Smith to really reach his ceiling outcome. But he had 5 top 12 weeks, 88 catches, which was 9th most at wide receiver, over 1,000 yards, and he was the wide receiver 9 in total points. How early is too early to draft Devonta Smith next year if round 7 was too late this year?
Yeah, for me, like last year, I ended up having a decent amount of Devonta Smith because I feel more comfortable. Like I love Pollard. Like I've been taking Pollard every single year he's been in the leagues. Every year it's like, Sky looks great. Zeke is dwindling. By like year 2, it's very clear Zeke was dwindling. They're going to give him the work eventually. But there's only so much like an individual running back can do to create a role for themselves. Whereas like just by the nature of the position, the fact that moving the ball through the air is more efficiently, like the better a receiver is, the literal more plays he can give his team, right? He gets first downs, he moves the chains, like he creates more yards per target than any running back does, like if he's a good receiver, right? So I'm more willing to like accept the mouths to feed argument in a backfield in which like Tony Pollard, despite being maybe the best running back in the league, couldn't earn more than a committee role because he's not like he's producing 5 yards, 6 yards every time he touches the ball, whereas like Devonta Smith is so much better than that. So in general, if I believe in the talent of a receiver, I'm more willing to say like, yeah, they will just make a role for themselves. So even though I like AJ Brown's incredible and it's just this massive target hog, like receivers and tight ends to a degree, at least more so than running backs by a significant margin, I'm willing to say like, yeah, I don't see at this moment how to give them a 20x% target share, but like they can push that because they are talented, where like running back to position is just so much different. So I think it is totally fine to have him as like a 3rd, 4th round pick, somewhere on that 3-4 turn. What he's going to be like, I assume like 24 or 5 years old, coming off of a wide receiver 1 season on an offense that was elite last year. So
yeah, I think also I've already started hearing people say that the Eagles don't want to pass as much and stuff, but next year they're going to face a first place schedule, and I think that can possibly put them in more positions where they do have to throw a lot. We saw it at times this year. They just didn't need to throw the ball as much. There were games which Jalen Hurts missed as well, and I don't believe we've seen the highest possible outcome for this offense yet. I'd like to believe there's another level they can take.
Yeah, Eagles don't want to pass. Seems like almost nonsense. Like they were like,
Yeah.
I think they are willing to run on their opponents when their opponents will let them do that. Like that is reasonable, and it is what they have shown to do. But when they faced a team like they faced Pittsburgh before they even got TJ Watt back, they just sat back and nuked Pittsburgh through the air. Like when you can get easy one-on-one matchups with mediocre corners, no pressure. This was the same way they did this against the Bears too, where they just let Jalen Hurts drop back, like clean, like 3-5 step drop back and heave it. They're really good at adapting to what their opponents are going to let them do. And at times that does mean they'll run a run first script, but I don't think they are philosophically committed to the run in any way. Like we saw this time and time again. They're totally fine blasting you through the air if you're going to give that to them. And they're really good, so giving it to them is easy in the sense of a lot of teams are not talented enough at corner, cannot generate the pressure because they have a great offensive line too, to keep up with the Eagles, right? So a lot of teams, just because they don't have the talent on defense, are going to be able to be beaten through the air. And we saw them do it. So I think it's like nonsense that they don't want to throw the ball.